I suppose if I win, my poon days are over. Jack had scribbled that note to himself back in 1960 while on the campaign trail. But that hadn't been true. Not after winning the White House, and certainly not before Jackie had caught Jack getting a blowjob in his Senate office, a young girl under his desk just after they were married. He didn't even try to hide his affairs. What? 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 That wasn't the thing that made you want to divorce him. He leaves you lying in the bed. Your baby girl is dead. You don't have the strength to go to the funeral. He's too busy sailing in the med. Okay. But then you've also literally found him receiving favors from girls under his desk, and you're like, another day in the life. What will it take for this woman? I ask you. What will it take? I mean, I'll tell you what it took. It took an assassination in order to get this woman to leave this man. I mean, if she decided to crawl into the casket with him, I would have been like, well, it's on brand. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. We're going to keep going with the Ask Not book by Maureen Callahan, and this time we're working on the Jackie Kennedy material. So, like I said at the beginning of the Carolyn Bessette story, this book is arranged in chapters about each woman, but they are not in chronological order. They don't follow each other. You can get one chapter about a woman in the beginning of the book. Later on, 200 pages later, you get the next chapter about them. And so for the sake of clarity, we're going to collect all the information about Jackie Kennedy, and we're going to do our series of episodes on Jackie before we move on to the next Kennedy woman who was destroyed. Now, before we begin, I do want to just give the disclaimer that I always want to give when we're reading a book like this. Books like this have to be read with discernment. So you can agree with all the material in the book and love every minute of it. You can highly disagree with it and be really upset. I think probably we need to find ourselves somewhere in the middle. So, a lot of this information is not necessarily new stories, but lots of new details. I want to say, in defense of the author, she says that she had this book fact-checked over and over and over again because she doesn't want to get sued. And she says, in the very beginning, she's got a little paragraph in the beginning that says that she wrote all of these stories with as many primary sources and interviews with living people as she could. And that where she could, she gave the material to the friend or family that she'd interviewed and asked, does this reflect your understanding of this person and the situation they found themselves in? And she did not proceed with that story until she got the okay from that living individual. So that's what she says. It is her process. I get lots of comments saying, how do we know this is true? Well, we don't. We didn't have a sit down with these people. We've only got Maureen Callahan's information. We have to remember that she writes for the Daily Mail, so we have to bear that in mind. And we have to bear in mind that there are certain things that don't make sense that she says. For example, in the Carolyn Bessette story, she claims that there was a squabble about the bodies of Lauren and Carolyn after the plane crash. The problem with that is that the bodies, as far as we knew as the public, had been cremated along with John Kennedy's body, and the ashes have been scattered at sea. There's footage of this. There's news footage of the family on the boat scattering the ashes at sea. But Maureen makes no mention of that. She says that the bodies were cremated, but then she says that the body of John was buried in Brookline, Massachusetts with his family and their family plots, and that the bodies of Lauren and Carolyn went to her mother in Connecticut. And she makes no mention whatsoever about the scattering of the ashes in a joint ceremony. And the whole point of that section was to talk about how the Kennedys were really terrible, awful, and hateful to Anne, Carolyn's mother, and they really made it seem like they couldn't get rid of Carolyn's body fast enough, that it was just so much trash to them. And so that's Maureen, that's the author's point, and that's what she focuses on. But the problem is we're left to wonder, okay, did you make a mistake? Did you not remember? Did you not know that there was a ceremony at sea in which the ashes were scattered? Or are you exposing a whole new story that actually there was no ceremony where they're scattering the ashes at sea, that was some kind of fabricated theatrics for the media, but they weren't really having a funeral out there. And if that's the case, why are you not putting a finer point on that? You know, so it's stuff like that that kind of like leaves you to go, wait a second, how did the fact checkers miss that? And if that is a fact, again, why aren't you make a bigger deal of it? Why are we so hung up on, oh, the Kennedys were so mean about Carolyn's body? Yeah, well, that's something interesting to note, but can we also talk about how they're mixed up in this conspiracy where they're feeding the media one thing, but the bodies are actually somewhere else? Because people have a lot of questions about what happened to John F.K. after he died and where his body, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracies, I think we need to find out what are happening to people's bodies after they die. And if you have information, Maureen, you need to like give it to us, you know? But anyway, all this to say, we read these books with discretion, especially books that are a little bit shallow and sort of like lots of tabloid stories strung together without a lot of depth and without this sort of like historical anchoring that we might get in a more traditional biography. Okay, I've talked long enough. Let's jump into the Jackie material. If you're enjoying this series and you're enjoying Ask Not, please consider sharing it with a friend. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, Jackie Bouvier Kennedy. This chapter begins by saying, later when the history books were written and the documentaries made and the anniversaries marked, that trip, for her, not him, was never inevitable. It wasn't fated. She hadn't agreed, as with so many things before, out of obligation. She'd gone because she wanted to, because it meant so much to him, and because he needed her. She needed him too in a different way, but just as much. Her greatest regret was telling one historian, one she'd trusted, that she and her husband had had sex the night before. At the time, full of sedatives and vodka, she wanted the historian and all those other inside men who'd worshipped her husband, who thought his compulsive womanizing meant that theirs was a marriage of convenience or political theater, or that worse, she wasn't enough. She wanted them to know. They were in love. Theirs was a real marriage. They were equals. Where had this need for validation come from? It's not as though the world knew the truth about her husband and his constant philandering. It's not as if she wasn't writing history or rewriting history herself, coronating two of those, quote, bitter old men, as she called all those jealous chroniclers, those who lived through her husband, the great man, vicariously, to tell a larger story, to craft a great myth that the country, she knew, would swallow whole. Besides, everyone only wanted to know one thing. What had it been like in the back of that car? So we're going to get into the day of the assassination. The day had felt hot and wild, the sun so strong. Jackie had gone to put her sunglasses on, but Jack said, no, please don't. They really want to see you. The convertible had been left open for just that reason. God, was he a charmer. John F. Kennedy, the youngest elected president of the United States, lavishing Jackie with praise for her star power. How could she say no? Ahead was a small tunnel. Soon it would be cool and dark, just for a few moments. All the screams of Jack's supporters lining the streets, the sounds of the motorcade muffled. Jack turned to her, puzzled. He held his hand out, and then it just dropped, and a chunk of his head came flying off, white, not pink, and then he slumped in her lap, his blood and brains all over her, her face, her legs. Her pink roses and white gloves were soaked through with blood. It was so thick, almost neon, kept gushing and gushing, just an endless supply. "My God, what are they doing?" she screamed. "My God, they've killed my husband! Jack! Jack!" She had no memory of leaping out of the car and crawling on the trunk. When she later saw the photos and the Zapruder film, she could never recognize the woman in the pink suit or what she was trying to do. Escape? Get help? Grab a piece of Jack's skull, his brain? Jackie would have fallen off that trunk and onto the road. The car was going 70 miles an hour and approaching 80, if not for her favorite Secret Service agent, Clint Hill. He ran toward her, nearly falling himself, if not for Jackie reaching out and grabbing him. Hill saw the terror in her eyes and was just as scared. "Get us to the hospital!" Hill screamed. "Get us to the hospital!" He used his body like a canopy, pushing Jackie back into this bloody cavern, chunks of bone and brain splattered everywhere, the car moving so fast that Hill's sunglasses flew right off his face. Jackie huddled over Jack, cradled what was left of his head, frantically tamping brain matter down into his skull, as if this could save him. "Jack!" she said, yelling over the sirens and the screams of the motor, gunning all around them. Jack, can you hear me? I love you, Jack. I love you. Hill saw clean through to the back of the president's skull. Now Jackie realized it too. My God, she screamed, they shot his head off! She never once asked if she'd been hit. She never asked if any of the blood was hers. She never flinched from the sheer carnage in that back seat. Her only concern was Jack. He had to know he wasn't going to die alone. Oh, this is just... I have chills. Can you imagine? I don't think any of us could imagine sitting there in the carnage of your husband's head, trying to hold his head together. Like, you know, I think that before I read this book, and this is so dumb of me, but it never occurred to me what she must have gone through mentally and emotionally after that day. I have no idea why I never considered what she experienced at night when she went to bed, like the PTSD of that day. We live in a day and time in which the words PTSD and trauma are just thrown around so flippantly. But a scenario like this, I can't believe that I've never considered what her life was like after that because of that incident. I don't know why I haven't, but this book goes to some detail, maybe not so much in this particular episode, but in episodes later, to talk about like how traumatized she was for the rest of her life because of this day. The book says, "You come with us." Big men in white surrounding the car ordered Jackie out. She was on top of Jack, shielding him. No one was going to see him this way. "Mrs. Kennedy, come with us." She couldn't look up. The more she was told to get out of the car, the farther down she sank, the tighter she held him. "Mrs. Kennedy," it was Clint Hill speaking softly, "please let us help the president." Jackie couldn't understand. Why was no one accepting reality? "I'm not leaving," Jackie said. "You know he's dead." "Please," Hill said. He was begging. "Let us get him into the hospital." Jackie looked up at Hill, keeping Jack's head, what was left of it, hidden against her chest. Hill realized she didn't want the world to see the president this way. If she couldn't save his life, she could at least save his dignity. Hill shook off his suit jacket and placed it over Jack's head. Finally, reluctantly, Jackie let the Secret Service agents pull her out, but she held Hill's coat over Jack's head the whole time. As she ran with his stretcher clutching its side. Then the whoosh of the emergency room curtain. Jack was on one side, Jackie the other. He wasn't alone, but she was. Coming toward her was Dave Powers, one of Jack's closest aides. He was practically part of the family, known jokingly as Jack's other wife. It was Dave who woke the president in the morning, who tied his necktie and smoothed his feathers and was always able to diffuse the tension in any given room. Jackie really loved Dave, and this was largely because she had no idea what he really did for Jack Kennedy. We'll soon find out. Dave had been riding in the car right behind theirs when Jack was shot. He burst into tears as Jackie, dry-eyed, oblivious to Jack's blood all over her, sat on a folding chair and smoked. Nurses and doctors rushed behind that curtain. It was pointless. No one comforted Jackie. They stared, though. One nurse had tried to strip Jackie's gloves right off. Others tried to move her to a bed. A doctor rushed by and Jackie slipped something into his hands. It was a piece of Jack's brain. Nellie Connolly, who had been riding up front in the same car with her husband John, the governor of Texas, was suddenly next to Jackie. John Connolly had also been shot. He was in trauma room too. Nellie said nothing. Softly, Jackie asked Nellie how her husband was. Silence, then after a few minutes, a brusque reply. "He'll be all right," Nellie said. Jackie motioned to Powers. "Dave," Jackie said, "you better get a priest." All around her, men, big Texans, orderlies and interns, Secret Service and police, were losing their composure. She sat there in her folding chair, quiet yet watchful, shooing away the doctors who kept telling her that she needed to be taken off and drugged, like Jack's personal physician, whom she and Jack called Doc Berkeley. "Mrs. Kennedy," Berkeley said, "you need a sedative." Berkeley was heaving with sobs. If anyone needed a sedative. "I want to be in there when Jack dies," Jackie told him. Jack was still taking shallow breaths. His heart was still beating, irregular, but still beating. "I'm going in there," she declared. Suddenly the nurse who had tried to take Jackie's gloves was standing in her way. Doris Nelson. "You can't," Doris told Jackie. Doris stood, soldier-like, between Jackie and the curtain. "I'm going in," Jackie said. Everyone thought she was so demure, but Jackie was tougher than anyone knew. She hated this nurse. Who was she? How dare she keep the First Lady from the dying President of the United States? "Move!" Jackie shoved Doris. "I'm going in and I'm staying," Jackie said. There had been a time when Jackie listened to doctors and nurses, all those years ago when Jack, 1 year into their marriage, was in a top hospital in New York City near death and calling for her desperately. His cries had broken her heart. In his anguish, she heard the little boy who'd been left in one too many hospital beds by his mother and father. But back then, Jackie did what the doctors said and stayed in the hallway, trusting they knew best. She had sworn she would never leave Jack alone like that again. The night before, the last time they would ever make love, they had been hoping for another baby. Jackie had woken that morning to her period, the first she'd had since losing her newborn son only weeks earlier. She hadn't thought she could survive that loss, but Jack got her through the worst of it. Now she was drenched in blood, his and hers. Chunks of his hair were stuck to her dress. Bloody strands were encrusted on her face. The last thing she wanted to do was clean any of it off. As they came to take Jack away, his body under a white sheet, Jackie noticed his foot sticking out. She cradled it in her hand and kissed it. The closest she came to losing control was in the hallway afterwards, nearly passing out, a nurse rushing to her side with a cold compress pressing it to Jackie's forehead. Father Thompson, one of the priests who had just prayed over Jack, approached Jackie. If ever a moment called for him to summon grace, compassion, to offer God's assurances that all would be all right, this was it. "Mrs. Kennedy," he said. Then, on the verge of tears, he fled. Jackie watched as her husband's body, naked and seeming so little, was placed into a bronze coffin. Berkeley was at her side, clutching her, shaking her. Was there no man in this hospital who could keep it together? Jackie summoned Kenny O'Donnell, a member of Jack's Irish Mafia. "You've got to get me in there alone before they close that coffin," Jackie said. "You've got to get me in." Jack couldn't travel back to D.C. in that coffin with nothing. In the trauma room, she slipped her wedding ring on his pinky finger, but she wanted to give him more, something from Patrick, the baby they'd lost. She thought of giving Jack the Medal of St. Christopher, the patron saint and protector of travelers. Oh, the irony. Jackie had recently bought a new St. Christopher medallion to replace the one he'd lost, her wedding gift to him. She had tried not to read too much into Jack losing that medal. Jack could be careless, not just with things, but with people, women, his own wife, even his own baby daughter. We're going to pivot from this day of tragedy, and we're going to talk about what happened when Jack showed some of this disregard for the people in his life, the people he said he loved the most. The book says that in August of 1956, Jack was about to make a last-minute run to be the vice presidential candidate vying for the spot on the Democratic ticket next to Governor Adlai Stevenson of Illinois, and Jackie was expecting. This was the first pregnancy she was carrying successfully after 2 miscarriages, her most recent the year before. She'd grieve those losses alone. No one understood, especially not her in-laws, those whose credo had always been, "Just get on with it." None of Jack's sisters had problems getting or staying pregnant or giving birth and then getting pregnant again, immediately. Jack's mother, Rose, had 9 children. Jackie's sister-in-law, Ethel, was on Rose's track. She and her husband, Bobby, already had 4, and Ethel was expecting her 5th in 5 years with not a single complaint. Jackie knew the Kennedys were judging her as a woman, and no one judged her more harshly than the Kennedy women. Anything else she might bring into the marriage, her erudition, her looks, her class, her bearing right out of central casting as a future First Lady, none were as important as giving her husband children. And the Kennedys blamed Jackie for losing her pregnancies. Why couldn't she stop smoking? Why did she have such a sensitive disposition? They wouldn't hear of stress, the rigors of campaigning, the pressure to look perfect and never misspeak, to quietly abide a Kennedy man's wandering eye. It's a side note, real quick. Definitely all those things are true, as far as like the wandering eye, the stress, feeling upset that you're being criticized because you feel a quote-unquote sensitive disposition. But they're not wrong about the smoking thing. For this author to sort of condemn the other Kennedy women for sort of being like, Jackie needs to stop smoking if she's going to, keep these babies to term. and act like, wasn't that really judgy of them? Well, I mean, yeah, they probably were being judgy. They seemed like they had judgmental spirits, but she kind of needed to stop smoking if she was going to, create healthy kids, and there's a whole reason why people could miscarry. This book goes on to put some interesting ideas, on the table as to why she was miscarrying. It had nothing to do with cigarettes and everything to do with her husband's philandering. But this is what I'm saying that I find frustrating with this author. The relatives have every right to be like, Jackie needs to stop smoking for the health of the baby. And this author, in this context, is going to say, those judgy, bitchy relatives of Jackie's are so hard to get along with. Whereas in another context, if she was, trying to make a different point, she would also be like, well, and she smoked all the time. So you can imagine why, she was having trouble carrying a baby to term. She'll take the same fact, and depending on what she wants you to take away from the story, she'll lean into that fact one way or the other. The fact remains the same, but she will try to present it one way or the other when she's trying to sway you emotionally towards one side. And I don't necessarily appreciate that in the writing. Anyway, Jackie wasn't naive. She knew Jack wasn't faithful, but she hadn't known just how promiscuous he was or how little he'd do to protect her. Later, she'd learn, along with the whole world and news reports too numerous to bear, that Jack had likely infected her with his own constant sexually transmitted diseases, the asymptomatic chlamydia among them, and this was quite likely why she'd had so much trouble carrying her first 2 pregnancies to term. So, when Jackie got pregnant a 3rd time, she was rightfully nervous, waiting until she was safely into her 7th month to create a nursery at their new home in Virginia. She felt so confident, in fact, that she would defy her doctor's orders and campaign for Jack at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. Jackie hated politicking, but she worked her heart out for him that mid-August week, rising early to attend ladies' breakfasts, standing shoulder to shoulder with her sister-in-laws under hot spotlights, her feet aching in heels, worrying that her mascara was running or her hair was frizzing, shaking sweating hands and saying all the right things, fighting nausea. She'd wanted to do all that for Jack. I wish this book would give us some little footnotes or something to let us know where she got this information, because I've heard Jackie say numerous times in interviews that she really enjoyed the campaigning. And of course, what is she going to say? These are like softball interviews, ladies magazine, circa the 1960s type of questioning. And, so it's not like some hard-hitting journalism where we're going to sit down and, expose Jackie's inner feeling about having campaigned for her husband. Of course, she's going to be supportive. But when did she say she didn't like it? Because she seems like a woman who was well-spoken and could carry herself really well and did a wonderful job boosting Jack's reputation because she was so comfortable in those situations. So when did she not like it? When did she say she didn't like it? That's all I'm saying. But it wasn't enough. Jackie was inconsolable when Jack fell short of VP nomination. She knew how anxious he was to reach the White House. He was sure he wasn't going to live a long life. Losing 3 siblings, 2 to violent deaths, and 1 simply gone missing could convince someone of that. So she sat beside Jack at a post-mortem family dinner, dressed in a fine black dress and pearls, and openly wept. It was that rarest of things for Jackie, an unguarded display of emotion. But she wasn't just sad about his loss. She wanted him to stay with her until the baby was born. She was nervous and afraid, and she wanted her husband. But Jack was heading to a trip to the Mediterranean, off to lick his wounds, sailing with his brother Teddy and fellow Senator George Smathers, and everyone in D.C. knew what Smathers and Jack got up to together. "Won't you stay with me?" she asked. Jack left the next morning. She hadn't wanted to beg to be the needy wife of an important man. And Jackie could rationalize his decision. It was the done thing in their world. Jack and Jackie's fathers, compulsive womanizers themselves, found nothing wrong with Jack's assignations, no matter the time or place or woman. Jackie had been bred to tolerate it, warned about whom she was marrying. Friend of the family? Have her over to dinner, seat her across from the wife, slide your hand under her dress. Staff member? Part of the job. Movie stars? Impossible to resist, don't even ask. There had been other humiliations, and they had cut to the bone. But baby Arabella was the first time Jackie thought she might divorce her husband. This is the first of 2 times that she really considered, with all her heart, that it might be time to end things with this monster that she was married to. In those last few weeks, when Jack was sailing on the Med, Jackie was at her mother and stepfather's estate in Rhode Island. The Med? Do people refer to the Mediterranean in that way? Yeah. Make it not be true. She hadn't wanted to be there, but it was the best of bad options. Her sister Lee was married and living in London, and Jackie had no one else. And she and Lee have a real complicated relationship. That was partly by design and partly who she was. Jackie was always happiest alone, even as a small child, preferring her dolls, her horses, and her books to actual company. As a teenager, she couldn't bear for anyone to see her imperfections, her faults, her black moods. Now she couldn't bear for anyone to know the truth about her marriage. Her mother knew some of it, of course. Why else would Jackie be with her waiting out the last weeks of her first viable pregnancy? The media bought the line about Jack needing rest. But all those men in the press had a bit of hero worship complex about Jack. She understood. Jackie did too. She'd had no shortage of suitors, and in fact, when she met Jack Kennedy, she had been engaged to John Husted, a successful stockbroker. Jackie was, quote, so terribly much in love with Husted, as she wrote to her priest 3 years prior. I know I'll marry this boy. It's the deepest, happiest feeling in the world. Then Jack Kennedy came along, and 2 months later, Jackie silently slipped her engagement ring in Husted's pocket and walked away. Husted thought it was the coldest thing anyone had ever done to him. But to Jackie, who hated messy emotional scenes, it was the cleanest, kindest cut she could deliver. Jack was hardly a sure thing, but Jackie was laser-focused on landing him. The handsome, charismatic, witty, intelligent, popular, powerful, wealthy Jack Kennedy, on track to become senator, and with his father's machinations and money, president. Jack Kennedy, who could, and most often did, have any woman he wanted. Jackie wanted to marry him. She knew that early on. It wasn't just his family's wealth, though that was something, the importance of marrying rich having been drummed into Jackie and Lee at a young age, but many things. She admired the Kennedy clannishness and loyalty, unlike what she had growing up. They were already a famous family, one resistant to outsiders, and that meant boyfriends, girlfriends, anyone who married in or had a seat at their table. And Jack was so much like her father, who was named John, but went by Black Jack. Both were cocksmen and rogues and renegades. People were drawn to Black Jack and Jack Kennedy with their movie star looks, but that darkness that floated below, a darkness few would ever know. Her father eventually slid into alcoholic ruin. But Jack was one of life's winners. He was an optimist, a brilliant conversationalist who, like Jackie, relished history and literature as much as gossip and badinage. He had that thing, that magnetism, that turned every head in the room his way. Jack was a challenge, and Jackie loved a challenge. If she became Jack's wife, she might succeed where her mother had not, taming an infamous womanizer. And Jack was a passport to a bigger life. That was one of the reasons Jackie rejected John Husted. Her life with him would have been comfortable, sure, but safe and simple, leaving her to wither in some leafy suburbia with all the other decorative housewives. She would be the equivalent of Wisteria, beautiful but sagging under the weight of low expectations. Jack Kennedy, though, this man lived among power brokers and princes, aristocrats and actors. His life was only going to get more exciting and unpredictable. Big, enormous. Jackie didn't just want that life, she wanted that life with him. To get it, she had to pursue Jack without seeming to. It wasn't ladylike, and it wasn't going to work. Jack Kennedy was nothing if not a hunter, so Jackie had to lure him in while being just unavailable enough. In the beginning, she'd miss his calls or just not return them right away, but it turned out that Jack was just as elusive, which made Jackie want him all the more. This mirrors so much the story of Carolyn and John Jr., in that Carolyn also realized that the way to move forward was to always seem as though she was just out of his reach. Slowly, she began making herself indispensable, hand-delivering homemade lunches in pretty baskets as John worked in his Senate office, traveling to other states to hear him speak and watch him woo a crowd, happily accompanying him to rubber chicken dinners and engaging in all the requisite mind-numbing small talk, gamely participating in all that Kennedy roughhousing up at the Cape, until a broken ankle, and the clear adoration of old Joe, Jack's father, left Jackie in her favorite place, alone with a book. She translated 10 books in French for Jack just so he could have a more nuanced take on Indochina, and also she joked to force a proposal. Only to herself would she admit it. It wasn't a joke. She was dying to marry him. They were, as Jackie put it, twin icebergs, impenetrable on the surface with all the messy, interesting stuff submerged and quietly breaking apart deep, deep below. Can you imagine wanting a proposal so badly that you translated 10 books into another language just so that your crush could have a more nuanced idea of another country because it would help him with his career? I mean, that is perseverance at the highest level of the game. I mean, you got to respect the girl, you know? I mean, like, talk about her little workhorse, but she knew what she was getting. And I think the thing too is that, you know, she had lived in like a really happy home, and, you know, she didn't understand the burden of having, of being attached to a man who was a womanizer. She hadn't seen what that had done to her own family. You could almost forgive her for her ignorance, but she actually knew exactly what that looked like. And to decide that she was going to walk into it too. I mean, we all have this naive idea, especially when we're younger, that other people's troubles, though they could be on our plate, they won't be our troubles. Like, we won't experience it like they did. You know, she can look at her mom and see that her dad was a terrible womanizer and a gambler and an alcoholic and think, well, but probably, you know, probably my father reacted the way he did because maybe my mom had some faults or something. But I'm not like that. You know, if I were given the same lot in life, it wouldn't turn out that way for me. So maybe that's why she pursued this so hot-headedly, completely ignoring the reality of the situation. But you do just have to wonder how she could be so self-deluded. Jack had never heard such an apt description of himself, being called an iceberg. His childhood trauma, even by Irish Catholic standards, had been repressed. The maternal neglect, the domineering and unfaithful father, the mysterious fate of his sister, beautiful Rosemary, who was only 23 when she disappeared, the remaining siblings understanding they were never to ask where Rosemary was or what had happened to her. Jack had lost his 29-year-old brother Joe Jr., a Navy pilot, to a mid-air explosion during World War II. 4 years later, in 1948, Jack's beloved sister Kik died in a plane crash. She was only 28. Jack himself had nearly died many times and was a bona fide war hero. Yet to look at him, you'd never know any of it. You even imagine that kind of background where so many of your siblings have died under horrific conditions, and one of your sisters has disappeared and you're not allowed to ask what happened to her. I think what some of my frustration with this author is that this is an incredibly horrific childhood that John F. Kennedy had, in that he lost so many of his siblings to such horrific and traumatic events. An explosion, a plane crash, a sibling who goes missing and you're not allowed to ask what happened. You know, and then, of course, he was so sick growing up and had spent so many of his years in the hospital with a mother who was as cold as ice. See, that's another thing. Like, this book does not dig into Rose or Ethel Kennedy to any satisfying explanation as to why they were such, like, raging bitches, honestly. Like, horribly mean women. Because they don't fit the narrative of this book. But when you consider that John F. Kennedy's mother was Rose, and you consider all the terrible things that happened to them, and you think about all the hypocrisy of pretending to be these good Catholics, but then really you're kind of just doing whatever as long as nobody catches you, there's just such a nuance to who he was as a person. There's just, there's so many questions that would make such an interesting book. Not to forgive Kennedy for what he did, not to gloss over or belittle, because this book is going to expose layer on layer on layer on layer to his twisted nature. But why don't we ask more questions? Why was the author just so willing to be like, he was a terrible person, crazy nut, what a wild guy? Yet in the same book, she has just told us that he lost all these siblings to such horrible ways. He wasn't allowed to ask what happened to the sister who was lobotomized. He was left in the hospital multiple times by a mother who didn't care. The competitiveness in the family, the necessity for perfection. All of that would make you a very unwell adult if you were given no tools to handle that kind of a childhood. So how can we just categorize and itemize all of the sins of this person? Well, giving them no grace for why they would be like that. Not a pass, but at least some empathy as to what happened there. Okay, well, to look at him, you would never know any of the things that had happened to him. Jack Kennedy, on the surface, was placid, easygoing, dashing, always a good time. And of all the women he'd been with, Jackie Bouvier, 23 years old, to Jack's 35. Really? was most like him. Neither had ever been much of a joiner. They were both self-sufficient, self-sustaining, stoical, their independence forged in lonely and often terrifying childhoods. Jack had been a very sick little boy. Jackie knew all about that. At 2 years old, he'd already survived measles, whooping cough, chickenpox, and then scarlet fever, which almost killed him. He'd spent a month in the hospital, then a few months recovering in Maine, a little boy alone, his parents never visiting. Bronchitis, appendicitis, tonsillitis, upper respiratory infections, jaundice, ear infections, on it went. Little Jack terrified and often near death, while his father, who glorified health and robustness above all else, was away with other women. And his mother? Jack was sure she didn't care. How else to explain her complete absence from Jack's bedside? Rose pumped out baby after baby and left her growing brood for couture shows in Paris or 6-week vacations in California. 6 weeks. The help gave the hugs. "You're a great mother to go away and leave your children all alone," Jack told her once. He was only 5 years old when he said that. Jackie understood. Black Jack, for all his devotion to Jackie, his namesake, was a drunk, a gambler, and a playboy. He was never home. The party, the real fun, was all outside the house with other people. No wonder her mother was so prone to rages. Black Jack, like Joe Kennedy, had a habit of cheating with his wife's friends, holding their hands or groping them right in front of Janet Lee Bouvier, American socialite and daughter of a wealthy Manhattan real estate developer. Janet, of course, was expected to maintain her ladylike decorum. Smile, ignore Black Jack's humiliations, swallow each one like a cold cocktail. Jackie was 5 when Janet first smacked her across the face. Jackie learned to take it. She knew her mother didn't like her very much. She looked just like Black Jack and had his independent, rule-breaking streak, her own dark magnetism and aloofness. She didn't much care what other people, including her own mother, thought, except when it came to men. Janet really did want the best for her daughters, and in the 1920s, flappers and sexual liberation aside, that had meant marrying well. Money was the only real protection a woman had in this world, Janet told them. Love was nice, but it wasn't enough, as her girls could plainly see. She worried particularly about Jackie's prospects. Well, but did her mother even have love? Because I don't think love shows itself in alcoholism, gambling, and playboy addictions. For any of them to have swallowed the idea that this was love, oh, this is love. It is not, my friends, you know. So how sad that they should have all been like, okay, no to love, yes to money. Well, y'all don't know what love is. Y'all haven't experienced it. But, like I said, Janet worried about Jackie's prospects. What man would want a woman like Jackie? She was extremely bright, sharp, and funny, cutting even, and she had real goals. Janet told Jackie to tone herself down, to hide her intelligence lest she scare off the best available men. But Jackie wasn't sure she could hide her smarts, mainly because she didn't want to. She needed a man who could keep up with her and let her shine. Her mother had hung her entire identity on being a wife and mother. And look how that turned out. Janet tried to hide her depression, but Jackie knew her mother drank and took pills and sometimes slept the day away. Neither one of her parents had healthy coping mechanisms. They were all id, their emotions wild and explosive. Little Jackie learned to shrink herself down while growing up fast. By the time she was 10, Jackie was the real adult in the house. Black Jack was gone by then, weary of his wife's outbursts and violence. Janet had once shoved her husband during an argument, and he hit his head and bled in front of Jackie, who had stopped playing with the stuffed animals. It was one of the few times Janet ever saw her daughter cry. Normally, Jackie wouldn't give her mother the satisfaction, especially when she became the object of her mother's rage, the slapping of the face, the hitting that continued well into Jackie's early 20s. If something unpleasant happens to me, Jackie said later, I block it out. I have that mechanism. Jack had it too. Can you imagine your mom slapping you in the face well into your 20s? I mean, for the fact that the mom is over here slapping her daughter on the regular, like that's just a thing that they do, twisted beyond all comprehension. What kind of a mother would strike a child? But then what kind of a woman raises her hand to strike the face of another woman who actually came from your own womb? What in the world? On August 23, 1956, Jackie woke up from a nap in great pain and bleeding heavily. She was rushed to Newport Hospital, where she underwent an emergency cesarean section and gave birth to a girl. The baby was stillborn. When Jackie came out of anesthesia hours later, at 2 in the morning, it wasn't her husband at her bedside, but her brother-in-law, Bobby. It was he who broke the news, who held Jackie's hand, who told her he would take care of everything, by which he meant the baby's funeral, and who made the excuse Jackie wanted to believe. Jack was still at sea. He was unreachable in the Med. Again, the Med. Why does his author feel that she has to refer to the Mediterranean as the Med? Am I just some poor country bumpkin that doesn't know that that's what we call it? But I thought we called it the Mediterranean. I don't know. Of course, Jack was reachable in the Med. Again. Bobby knew because he'd already spoken to his brother. What's done is done, Jack told Bobby over the phone. The baby's lost. Jack saw no point in cutting his vacation short. Her husband had given no greater rejection. Mourning a child she never got to see or hold, Jackie lay in the hospital absorbing the message that her husband's absence, the lack of so much as a phone call, had sent. I'd rather be off with random women than comforting you. I'm not sad about the baby. Someone else can take care of the funeral. What does it matter? She's dead. That, she would read much later, was what Jack had said to his own father. I don't care how much pain you're in. I don't care about you. How could you? Yeah, the baby's dead, but your wife isn't. You know, I'm sorry about the baby. Devastated for them about the baby. But if that's really how you feel, if you'd never developed an attachment to this baby, you know, as so many people say, men develop an attachment when they see the baby. Women develop an attachment as soon as they find out they're pregnant. If this was the dynamic that was playing out, okay, fine, whatever. All right, you cold son of a bitch. That's how you're going to be about it. But your wife is very much alive in a hospital bed. You don't care about comforting her? How do you think she feels about this? Oh no, he's got to keep cruising the Med. Really, what else was there to understand? Meanwhile, anyone who had ever seen Jackie nurse Jack back to health in those early days of their marriage, Jack nearly dying after one of 4 risky back surgeries, would never have doubted her love for him. And had Jackie ever complained that she'd been sold a false bill of goods? There's that false bill of goods again. That she'd been led to believe she was marrying a healthy, vibrant young man? That she'd been lied to? It's best if you don't go into my medical problems with Jackie, Jack had told his private physician, Dr. Janet Travell, before their wedding in September 1953. I don't want her to think she married an old man or a cripple. And indeed, Jack's illnesses, when Jackie finally learned of them, were overwhelming. Yeah, they were. And let me just say this right now. Carolyn was not sold a bag of goods. Carolyn knew what she was getting. Jackie, on the other hand, potentially could have been sold a bag of goods, because there really was an active attempt to hide from her the reality of what she was getting if she married him. And I think that she really was shrouded from some of his womanizing. I really think that she was not aware of what was happening to the full extent. Clearly, you know, she was having miscarriages, which have now been attributed to possible sexually transmitted diseases, and she had no idea that's why she was losing the babies, right? So, you know, even up into their marriage, she didn't really realize what she was dealing with. You can imagine that when they were dating and when they were engaged, she definitely didn't know what was going on. So I'm much more willing to extend her the charity of believing that she did not know who she was marrying or what she was marrying. Because listen to these things that he's suffering. Like, even if he was a perfect person, but his health was this bad, it would have been shocking, you know, but it's his health and then all this other moral stuff that she would have had to contend with. He suffered from colitis, ulcers, prostatitis, urinary tract infections, frequent headaches, stomach aches, upper respiratory infections. One leg was shorter than the other, a congenital defect. He had Addison's disease, a rare endocrine disorder that left him dependent on cortisol injections and hormones secreted through an implant in his thigh. The Addison's was so serious that Joe kept Jack's meds locked in safety deposit boxes all over Europe in case Jack had an attack abroad. Jackie never even had a honeymoon period with her husband. In fact, days into their actual honeymoon, Jack suggested she fly home alone so he could, quote, travel with friends. Jackie declined. She later felt ashamed that she even considered his request. He was hardly in a position to be so callous now that Jackie needed him. It was as if his own body waited for him to have a partner before it broke down. Jack's back was such a mess that he couldn't bend over to tie his shoes, or climb stairs without help, or tolerate riding in a car. He walked with crutches, an obscenity to him. They both knew a wheelchair was next. There was a surgery that might help, but it could very well kill him. Joe begged him not to have it. He'd already lost 3 children, and he couldn't bear the idea of losing Jack, his favorite. one of those three was Joe's own doing. So, I don't know if we should count her in why he was so sad, but Jack was never cowed by risk. In fact, he craved it. And to Jackie, this was one of his sexiest qualities. After all, his family was selling him to America, deservedly, as a war hero who had swum 4 miles with a badly injured soldier on his back, a strap clenched between his teeth to tug him through the choppy ocean. If Jack could survive that, why couldn't he survive this? And if he didn't, well, Jack told Jackie he would rather die on the table than be disabled for life. She understood. So, in October of 1954, when Jack was wheeled into New York City's hospital for special surgery on a stretcher, the press gathered out front. She was by his side, holding his hand. Throughout his 4-hour operation, Jackie waited and prayed. Afterwards, she sat with him in the hospital hours each day, mopping his brow, spoon-feeding him, helping him go to the bathroom, putting on his socks and slippers. She canceled a promised appearance for a Boston charity fashion show at the last minute, even though it was just a 90-minute flight and she could have done the trip in a day and been back at Jack's bedside that evening. She wrote to the chairman and said that she just couldn't leave Jack even if it was for a day because he wasn't allowed any visitors, and she was afraid that in that morbid hospital it would lower his morale, and it just didn't make any sense for her to go, she said, when the whole time she'd be worrying about Jack. When he slipped into a coma days later, Jackie was there. When the priest was summoned to administer last rites, she was there. All 3 times. When Jack fought his way back only to spend the next 2 months in the hospital, Jackie rallied him, bringing stacks of newspapers and magazines and reading aloud to him. His curiosity, she knew, was key to his recovery. As long as he remained interested in the world, in what was going on outside the hospital room, he was fighting. So she brought him games and made him laugh and encouraged his friends to visit. And she shrugged off the Marilyn Monroe poster, which he turned upside down above his bed, positioning Marilyn's crotch in his face. Ugh. She even ignored the private hospital visit from Grace Kelly, although it made her nervous. Grace Kelly? I hope that wasn't untoward. Where was Jack for her now? That she's lying in her own hospital bed, with the loss of their daughter, who she didn't even get to hold, hanging in the air, and her husband's just, having his jolly time on the med. Sorry, the baby's dead. Get over it. Jackie was so weak and depressed she couldn't even attend her daughter's burial. Bobby stood over the baby's coffin while Jack was still sailing with his starlets and bikini babes off the south of France, drinking, smoking cigars, having fun. She knew he was cheating on her. What kind of a narcissist had she married? A week went by and Jackie was still in the hospital with no word from Jack. He intended to keep cruising around the Med till September, and as soon as he got home, he was going off to campaign for the next 3 months. So really, Jack was leaving her for the foreseeable future. Jackie wanted an annulment. Amen, sister, get it. This was the time. This was the time. He's not taking that marriage seriously. Cut ties with this monster. Cut ties with him. He has never understood what it is to be married. Ever. Whatever is going on, whatever play acting you guys are doing, he certainly was not ready to commit to marriage. Since day one, on your honeymoon, he's like, why don't you fly home early? I got some people I want to hang out with, and it ain't you. That would be the time to be like, okay, I'm going to need to meet with my priest, and we're going to need to come up with a plan on how I get the hell out. Okay, but, it's not too late now, lady. Your husband has never taken your marriage seriously. He never held up his end of the deal. Those vows were not real. It's time for an annulment. The book says divorce was not enough. She wanted the Catholic Church to nullify their marriage, negate it, treat it as a great nothing, just as her husband had done. I'm never going back, Jackie said. Jack's self-preservation must have kicked in because 3 days after the baby's funeral, he was suddenly in her hospital room. 10 days had gone by. Any suspicions Jackie had about why he was there, why the change of heart and the great sacrifice of yet another bacchanal, were well-founded. Her nemesis, the equally lecherous George Smathers, was the one who got Jack back home to her. It was hardly the stuff of romance. If you ever want to be president, Smathers said, you better haul your ass back to your wife. When Jack finally landed in the States, he told a reporter that Jackie had not let him know about the stillbirth because she didn't want to, quote, ruin his vacation. Okay. Why were you even on vacation, man? Your baby was due any minute. Right? So, well, I would have come back, except my wife didn't tell me. What? Did you not know she was pregnant? Had you missed the last 7-8 months? You didn't know about the stillbirth, but you did know she was pregnant, right? Well, Jackie's mother was obviously disgusted. He is unconscionable, Janet said. Everyone in D.C. knew the truth. Jack's womanizing had always been off limits with the press, but how much longer could they abide by this gentleman's agreement? If a fraction of Jack's sex life made the papers, it wouldn't be Jack left humiliated. When Jackie was finally released from the hospital, she stayed with her mother in Hammersmith Farm, where she mourned her baby and her marriage. Can you imagine? I mean, two of the greatest tragedies, the death of your baby and then also your marriage crumbling right before your eyes, and all interconnected too. How could I have been so stupid? She'd ask through tears. Janet couldn't stand to hear Jackie blame herself. None of this was her fault, but it was obvious why Jackie felt this way. Rose and Joe Kennedy were already making snide remarks about Jackie smoking having caused the stillbirth. What? Okay. If the relatives wanted to say amongst themselves that Jackie should probably stop smoking like prior to, okay. Like I understand I probably would have also been like, she's still smoking. But the baby's gone. Must we add salt to the wound and be like, but you know we told you to stop smoking, so that's probably why your baby's dead. I mean, these people, it's like, I think this is why I'm so agitated. I mean, I've mentioned this already before, but like, I'm really, really, really bothered when people say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but then they act in ways that are so contrary to the values of the faith, but they want all of the immediate rapport that you can get when you say, oh, I'm a Christian, because, you know, there's lots of other people who are Christians, and so they immediately like, oh, well, sister and brother in Christ. But when you act like this and you tell your poor grieving daughter-in-law, well, your baby's dead because you smoked. So really, this is your fault. I hate to break it to you. Like, and then on the other hand, you're over there rubbing your rosary together and saying your Hail Marys and your Our Fathers. It's like, do you really love our Lord? Because I don't think our Lord would have us treating folks like that, you know? I feel like if you really believe that God of the universe, the creator of all things, sent his son down to die and to take your place, you would be going out of your way to watch your mouth and be going out of your way to think, okay, how can I glorify the Lord with the way that I interact with others? That would not include pulling your daughter-in-law over and being like, but we told you to stop smoking. You know, it's rough. It's rough. She's dead, but there's a mirror if you want to find out whose fault this is. The marriage ended. The Kennedys, too, would blame Jackie. The press would blame Jackie. Society in the whole laid the success or failure of any family, but especially one with this much luster on the woman. It was Jackie's performance as a wife, dutiful, domestic, sexual, and a mother, if she could ever successfully give her husband children, that would determine the success of their marriage, not Jack. Janet told Jackie to get a divorce while she was still young and beautiful, and could make another life for herself. That November, physically stronger but emotionally still a wreck, Jackie left for London to be with Lee and her brother-in-law. She must have been desperate if she was running to the arms of Lee. You know, this is the second time I've made a little comment about Lee, but Lee was taking swipes at the guys that Jackie found herself with all the livelong day. But then Jackie would do the same to her. Now, rumor says, this book supports it, that Lee at one point even made a pass successfully at JFK. So, you know, things had to be pretty bad when you're running to your mom who used to hit you in the face since you were 5 all the way up into your 20s. And then when you're done with hanging out with your mom, you go and you hang out with your sister who made a pass at your husband on multiple occasions. Like, does the girl have no one to turn to? Jack could spin all the stories he wanted to his adoring press, but Jackie's silence, her decision to put 3,000 miles between them, spoke louder than anything that he could say. Jackie had left him, likely for good. In Virginia, she confided in her neighbor Walter Ritter, the famous newspaper publisher. If anyone knew how this could play out in the media, it was Walter. She asked him to go for a walk and give her advice. What would happen if she filed for divorce? It's not a decision you could make on a personal basis, Ritter said. That this came as no surprise to Jackie, product of a broken home, a prominent wife, considering divorce precisely because her husband had depersonalized and abandoned her and the stillborn baby, was as much a reflection of her dutiful nature as it was the times. If you should leave him and divorce him, there's no way he can be president, Ritter said, and I doubt you want that mark on your life. I know, Jackie said. She couldn't see that this was not something that she was doing to Jack, but something Jack was doing to himself. Yes! Every time Jack decided to run out on that marriage, it was him being like, I don't really want to be president. It's like, the world doesn't owe you a presidency, Jack, just because you want it. You can't just act whatever way comes into your pretty little head and then be like, but I still get to be president, right? That's still on the table, right? No, it isn't, you big pig. Jackie had Ritter's sympathy up to a point. We've all known Jack is difficult in the ways of women. Even that wording, difficult in the ways of women, you mean just a nasty, disgusting animal running around just sticking it wherever he can put it? I mean, look, what are you talking? We all know he has a difficulty with women. In the ways of women, it's difficult for Jack. Hey, how about it's difficult for the women when Jack comes walking around? But Ritter says that A, Jackie knew from the beginning, you signed up for this, don't complain, and B, I'm sure there are many moments that make up for it. That was true, Jackie had to admit. Despite everything, she was still deeply in love with Jack. He was the smartest, the cleverest, the best gossip, the brightest light in any room. When she had his attention, there was nothing like it. When he's around, Jackie told Ritter, he's just an enchantment. So think hard, Ritter said. Now you're in the public domain, and the decision you have to make involves a great deal more than your personal relationship with Jack. I know that, Jackie said. I know that, and that terrifies me. It was a terrible weight for a 28-year-old woman, the idea that her needs could cost the country a potentially great president. But, I mean, okay, if he can't manage to be your husband, how is he going to be a potentially great president? You know, like, let's start with small goals. Can you run a household? Can you meet the needs of the people in your house? Oh, you can't even make your wife happy? I'm struggling to see how you're going to make the country happy, right? Oh, you can't run your house successfully in any conceivable way? Will you know what to do with the budget? You know, it's like, Jackie, I don't know if you're robbing the world of a great, world leader. I don't know that you're robbing the country of the next Abraham Lincoln. You know what I'm saying? So she's told herself, couldn't she just tolerate it, as so many women of their class did? Sexual promiscuity did not necessarily mean anything. So much of being Mrs. John F. Kennedy made up for that. Didn't it? Did it? I don't know. After all, her life's ambition, as she wrote in her boarding school yearbook, was, quote, not to be a housewife. But then again, what was becoming First Lady if not becoming America's preeminent housewife? This was Jackie's conundrum. Her best chance at a great life depended on maintaining a smart marriage. Faithful husbands did not necessarily make the most interesting or enthralling ones. If anything, the more successful Jack was, the crueler he became. I suppose if I win, my poon days are over. Jack had scribbled that note to himself back in 1960 while on the campaign trail. But that hadn't been true, not after winning the White House, and certainly not before Jackie had caught Jack getting a blowjob in his Senate office, a young girl under his desk just after they were married. He didn't even try to hide his affairs. What? What? That wasn't the thing that made you want to divorce him. He leaves you lying in the bed. Your baby girl is dead. You don't have the strength to go to the funeral. He's too busy sailing in the med. Okay. But then you've also literally found him receiving favors from girls under his desk, and you're like, another day in the life. What will it take for this woman? I ask you. What will it take? I mean, I'll tell you what it took. It took an assassination in order to get this woman to leave this man. You know what I mean? If she decided to crawl into the casket with him, I would have been like, well, it's on brand, because she just seems so devoted to him, even though he is a problem. Every way you look at it. A problem. Well, now with Arabella gone, no one asked Jack how he could have left Jackie alone for over a week, or how he could have left it to Bobby to bury their baby. Maybe if there were more women in the press corps, things would be different. Maybe not. There was little surprise that all Jack's fans in the nation's newspapers would print happily and reprint the rumor that old Joe Kennedy paid Jackie $1 million not to divorce Jack. Little surprise, too, that they wrote Jackie Kennedy off as bought and paid for. In their estimation, Jackie Kennedy was the problem here. Shallow, self-absorbed, and willing to sell her soul for the right price. What had she gotten herself into? Privately, even during their engagement, Jackie agonized. In Jack, she had landed America's most elusive bachelor. And to her surprise, Jack admired her mind. He loved how smart she was. He loved that her dream job was, as she once said, more than once, to be overall art director of the 20th century. Jack had not known that he had had bad taste or no taste until he met Jackie. He let her style him, order his designer suits, furnish their homes, renovate and landscape. Jackie was showing him the elemental pleasures of beautiful things. She elevated his taste level, and he was her eager student. As Jack and the old man said more than once, Jackie really classed up the Kennedys. It irked Jack's sisters to no end. Igor Cassini, a high society gossip columnist, and younger brother Jackie's favored designer, Oleg Cassini, talked about a particular Kennedy picnic on the Cape. The dressed-down Kennedy sisters had packed beer and hot dogs, while Jackie showed up immaculate in a white Christian Dior sheath dress, toting a basket filled with foie gras, caviar, and cold champagne. Pat Lawford and Eunice Shriver never got over that, Cassini said. Years later, they were still jabbering away about it. It is kind of a real divergence. For Jack and old Joe, that level of refinement was Jackie's superpower. Their only concern was whether the average American woman was ready for a first lady like her. Would such a young beauty, a well-traveled sophisticate, become a symbol of aspiration or aspersion? Would women feel talked down to and looked down upon? Or would they see in Jackie a point of pride, a representation of America's own youth and futurism? Jackie let the Kennedy men fret. She wasn't about to focus group herself into becoming mumsy or relatable. She could not be anyone other than who she was. So we're going to end it right there. That's not the end of this particular chapter, but that is the end of our reading. I've already read well over an hour, so sorry, it's a longer episode. But when we come back together, we're going to pick up on that assassination day and what was happening there. We're going to talk about the absolute dog that Johnson was, laying there sprawled out in the bed on Air Force One when Jackie comes, shows up, soaked in blood and brain matter, and that big old loser is just laying in her bed, giving notes to his secretary, not even thinking, hey, maybe she's going to want to come to her room and have a moment of peace and silence by herself after this chaotic event. No, he's just lounging on the very bed, her marriage bed, on Air Force One, like it's, he's got a right to be there. That guy was the biggest loser known to man. How he ever managed to find himself in the office of president, it's the stuff of conspiracy. But anyway, that is the end of that. I will let you go. I don't have a long spiel of things to say, but this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Jackie Kennedy story. I mean, we didn't even get into any of the controversial material yet. I mean, hardly, really have not even begun to talk about the stuff that just blew my socks off. So that's going to come in the later parts. But I hope you guys are enjoying this with me, and I will see you guys later this week. Bye.